But ER doctors now, my friends that I talk to say, it's interesting. When I'm writing up my death report, I'm being pressured to add COVID. Why is that? Why are we being pressured to add COVID to maybe increase the numbers and make it look a little bit worse than it is? I think so. And I say, do we need to still shelter in place? Our answer is emphatically no. Do we need businesses to be shut down? Emphatically no. Do we need to test them and get them back to work? Yes, we do.
Well, look, what I wanted to do is I didn't want to spend too much time, but did you all get to watch the video that I just posted up for your email just to have a look? And I think the two guys were Dan Erickson and Artin Masahi. Who saw that one?
Yes.
Yeah, you all saw that one?
Yes.
So what I want to do is that I just want to say a couple of things about maybe what they said right at the end, and maybe ask you a couple of questions and get your feelings around what's going on or what your thoughts are. This is what they said.
We're right. We're saying, here's the data. Here's what we understand. Mm-hmm. It's not a you're right and you're wrong thing. It's the way we interpret data. We work in the field, and some people that are not working in the field and still getting a paycheck have a different opinion. If you weren't getting a paycheck, you might have a different opinion. If you weren't getting a paycheck, if everybody in here is getting a paycheck, right? Cafe Rio is not. They've all been furloughed. Mm-hmm. When you don't get a paycheck, your opinions start switching. Yeah. If you were at home, furloughed, for the unforeseeable future, would you be excited about staying sheltering in place?
No, I mean, I completely understand. I mean, we're seeing this around the country now, I think, that people are demanding that they be allowed to go back to work. And
well, it's also, at what point, who says what's safe? Are you smart enough to know what's safe for you? Or is the government going to tell you what's safe for you? Mm-hmm. Who tells you as soon as they use the word safe, that means control. We know what's safe for you. You're too dumb to understand disease, you see. We know what's safe. And so they're going to use this model for different things. We got a bomb threat from China. Everybody stay in their home for 3 months. What? They are using this to see how much of their freedom can they take from you.
I want to ask you this. Do you think you're old enough and mature enough to be able to make a decision for yourself, or do you need the government to take away your freedom? Because that's what's happening. Or that's what's happened. That's in my eyes. This is my opinion. Do you think what's happening, and do you think you're old enough and mature enough to make your own decisions about going about your own day, doing what you need to do, or do you need government intervention to tell you how you should behave? So Sergio, I might start with you. What is a response to that? Do you think you're old enough and ugly enough to look after yourself?
I'm 33. I consider myself old enough and mature enough to do my day-to-day tasks. The problem is that, for example, here in Panama, what you were talking about, they went total closure. So if they find you on the street, you get arrested, or you'll get a
Serge, it looks like you cut out there, mate. I might just move on. Hey, Ed, how you going? Just give us a big wave if you can hear me. All right, Serge, I might try with you one more time. So you were saying something like, you are old enough and ugly enough to look after yourself, but if you are caught walking the streets, what was that? You would get a fine?
You can get a fine, or you can actually get arrested.
All right. And what are they arresting you for?
Well, if you here, they did restrictions based on your gender and your ID. So on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, only women can go out. Tuesdays and Thursdays, men can go out. Saturdays and Sundays is no one can go out. And the time you can go out, it depends on the last date of your ID or passport. So my ID ends on 8. So I am allowed to go out on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 7:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. If I am caught outside that time, I can get a fine or I can get arrested. Depends on where they find me. If they find me near a supermarket and I'm beyond my time frame a little bit, they're flexible and they just tell you go home. But if they find you doing whatever, nothing to do with finding your groceries or doing necessary stuff, you're in trouble. And on a daily basis, they show those statistics of how many people got arrested. And
Okay, that's incredible. So what I'm hearing here is that where you are is that you've got alternate days where you can go out. Men can go out on this day, women can go out on this day. On Sundays, no one's going out, and it's depending on your last digits of your security number whether you can go in. So that to me just sounds incredibly arrogant and incredibly outrageous. Dan, can I ask you what's going on in New Zealand? I heard something like. You've only had one case yesterday. The curve has been flattened, whether there's been a curve or not. What's going on where you are? Do you think you're old enough and ugly enough to make a decision for yourself, whether you think you're healthy or whether you should be able to get up and go back to work if you do work?
Well, I'm certainly ugly enough, old enough, 48. I personally, I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat here, personally believe we're being duped. I don't know to what end. We have a very low case rate. Yes, I'll give you that. Less than 20 dead, way less than 20 dead. Statistically, we're still on the same number curve as the rest of the world. It's just down to numbers. I mean, America's got 350 million, give or take. Of course, their numbers are going to be huge in comparison to ours. There's more going on to this than meets the eye. I think it's an erosion of freedom tactic on something which has the statistics of the flu. What
can you do? Can you get up and just walk out? Can you get up out of your chair right now and you can go down to the local super? Can you go to the beach? Can you just hang around the beach and have a good day? What's your restrictions over there?
Kinda. Okay, I can by all means go to the supermarket or shops at any time, day or night. No problem at all. I can't leave my area, as in my town. We've just dropped our restrictions yesterday from level 4 to level 3, which means shops are starting to open again. At level 4, we were always allowed to exercise, which has been the biggest joke because Auckland City had thousands and thousands of people walking up and down the roads and on the beaches, taking their dogs for a walk, basically holding hands and coughing on each other. Restrictions, we weren't allowed to hunt or fish, which I found very, very odd. We're a small country which relies on those sort of things. I'm not a particularly rich person and I hunt and fish for food, not for pleasure. We weren't allowed to do that. It didn't stop me, but we weren't allowed to do it. As for the beach, you're allowed to go to the beach if it's for exercise.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same where a lot of people are. I'm just really I'm confused and concerned, and I'm, when I hear the word "you're allowed to," it's like I need permission to get out of my house and go for a walk. This word, we're allowing you to. It's like I don't think as a free person myself, and I think I should be able to make my own decisions whether I want to walk around my free country. And be free to be able to travel this great earth that we have. Because I wonder, because this is what I'm thinking here, I wonder if the restrictions are in direct opposition to what our human rights are. Because I'm always about our human rights. And do the restrictions override my basic human rights? So when you say, Dan, about hunting and fishing, that is your basic human right, because we should be able to supply ourselves with our own sustenance. We should be able to feed our family. And so I think that's where the restrictions may say, oh no, if you are feeding your family, we can't stop you from doing that because that's a basic human right. And if we use those words, like I said, when I got pulled over by the police and I use that word, does your restrictions or what you're telling me to do, does that override my basic human right? They won't answer that because they can't answer that. So Lynn, can I ask you, I'm thinking where you are, tell us what's going on where you are. What have the restrictions told you? And do you think from your perspective, and I'm talking to human beings here. I'm not talking to a political party here. I'm not talking to anyone here that's got an agenda. I'm talking to people who are just human beings to want to be able to go about your whole day and do the freedoms that you want to be able to do. Lynn, what's going on where you are?
So in the state of New Jersey, we have certain restrictions where we're supposed to stay home unless we have essential where you're going out for groceries or something like that. And they've just opened parks. They had closed them. They had closed the beaches. They had closed everything. The only thing that had been open really are grocery stores. You can go to a gas station, but pretty much everything else is closed. Now they put in a restriction where we have to have a mask to enter a supermarket. Now, a lot of the supermarkets, they went and they have, they only allowed a certain amount of people in, and they've got where there's arrows, so you're going one direction up and down aisles. Nobody follows it, no one. So wearing a mask is actually a good thing because you really don't know who's been infected and who hasn't. We've had a lot of testing done because we had a community near here that had a very large spike, and they were traveling between New York City and their town. It's a specific group of people, and they were spreading to the surrounding areas. So we had large numbers. Now in northern New Jersey, there's a lot of COVID. Down where I am, not so much. I'm in a town of about 11,000, and I think we had 60 cases. So that's really not a lot. Am I old enough and wise enough to do what I need to do? Yeah, absolutely. I don't need anybody to tell me. Before they were asking us to wear a mask, there were times that I went into public where I wore a mask because it made me feel comfortable. Currently working from home, I'm lucky enough that I can do that. I can work remotely, but returning to the office may be an issue because we went to the open concept, so everybody's on top of one another. And I happen to work next to a guy who's like Typhoid Mary. I mean, he just comes in sick and he like infects everybody. Before we had this situation, he had flown to Puerto Rico to board a cruise, which I really think was a stupid idea. And then he went and it got canceled. He knew it would get canceled, and then he flew back again, and he and his partner both wound up sick. So, you know, I think it's just, you have to make the only choice that's right for you.
Yeah.
I don't think that the government should be telling me what to do. And I think that part of this, and I've got to go along with something Dan said, to what end is this? So I don't know that this is as bad as they're making it out, but I know that from here, our hospitals, if they classify something as COVID-19 death, that they get paid more money for our senior citizens. There's like a 20% higher rate that they get paid out. COVID-19, all you have to do is say that, and like everybody just runs and gives money. We're going to be like trillions and trillions of dollars in debt because of this, because we're just giving it all away. And I don't know what the reason for all of this is, but when you look at the statistics from the video, it really isn't much worse than or different than the flu. We don't have a vaccine for it. That's the big difference. But otherwise, I don't see where, you know, there's a huge difference.
Thank you. That's well articulated, Lynn. Like, it's really well articulated what you're saying. And it seems like from who I'm speaking to at the moment, everyone seems to have the same restrictions that are in place. And I want to ask you, Ed, do you think this is a total violation of your own human right?
Well, I can see I'm going to fit right in this group. And yeah, it is about the same here. I was real curious when I heard Lynn was from New Jersey, because, you know, I've heard that New Jersey is worse than where I am. Where I am, it's not too bad. My county, which, you know, not just the village I live in has about 1,600 people. The county probably has maybe 25,000. We have 100 cases in our county verified right now. So there aren't a whole lot of people that have it. Obviously, there are more than what they've verified, but it's not massive yet here. But to get to your question, yeah, I think this is a violation of our rights. What scared me and what I've been thinking about, I was thinking about this before I watched that video. This is a decision we should be making individually. I don't live in New York City. New York City, with the way people are crammed in, it's probably awful there. It's not like that here. We shouldn't do the same thing they're doing. What I think should have happened, we need to get all the information that's out there. We need true information, and then we need to make our own decisions when we are educated and know what's going on. But we're depending on the government and the media for our information. How bad is that? This is the worst thing I think I've ever seen in my entire life. My life in the hands of government and media. That's to me extremely scary.
Yeah, I think when you have somebody who wants to take control, because I think one of the questions that I think Lynn you had posed was, you know, to what end? To what end is this? And what I keep hearing is that, is it around control? Is it that they want to be able to control us? And this is one of the liberties that they will take away of us, from us. So, I mean, I did hear Dan Erickson say right at the end of that, he said,
if you notice the way Americans are responding, if you go to any gun store in town, guess what they're out of? Ammo. None of them have ammo. I went to 3 of them. They said thousands of rounds have been bought. Why? People are mad. They're starting to post on my Facebook with their AKs going, let's roll.
so I'm thinking, what does that tell you? Because he said something here. He said, if you stomp on our freedoms, this only has one ending, which is violence.
If you stomp on our freedoms, that has one ending, and it's violence.
And I think what people are doing, and I've got a friend in the UK as an example, and she's a school teacher, and all she wants to do is get up and go back into school and see her kids. That's all she wants to do. But at some stage, you know, 3 weeks into isolation, it kind of like, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, this is the right thing to do. But now I'm starting to get frustrated. Now I'm going to be pissed off. So one of the questions that I think, do you think herd immunity is the way to go then? Because then you heard them say something like, all right, Sweden has this population and Norway has this population. One is doing it, one is not doing it. And you have a large number, but a small amount of casualties and deaths. So I'm going to ask you, do you think herd immunity would be the best solution to this? And consider this though, they're saying that there'll be hundreds of thousands of deaths. Do you think that's an acceptable percentage for us to be able to get back to our lives? Who wants to respond to that? Go for it, Dan.
Absolutely. Eventually, if you get it and your immune system is compromised, you'll get sick. And if you have lung problems, heart problems, kidney problems, it will affect you worse. Like most things, you got the flu and you get pneumonia, you're fucked. Sorry, that's not good. Herd immunity has worked around the world. It works for the flu. It works for all sorts of bugs. This is just a new bug we haven't dealt with. I'm sorry for people who have lost loved ones. I really am. It's sad when these things happen. But pandemics, they happen. The flu happens every year. We just need to come to a better grip. As for the statistics, I don't believe them. They've been made up. It's already proven that the statistical computer models of extrapolating future data doesn't work. Because at some point, you have to have a scientist come in and go, look, we need to add this. And somebody else goes, we need to add this. Oh, but you forgot this. The computer doesn't come up with those solutions and gives us incorrect numbers.
So tell me, somebody's got to answer me this then. So what is the overall goal of all this? We wouldn't be talking about this if it was as simple as what you say, Dan. You know, it's like the flu and people die from the flu and we should just go about our day. But we're not. We're not talking about this. We're talking about this specific disease or this illness or this flu-like symptom, SARS-2. To what end is the objective here? If I've got people sitting in front of me right now and I can look on my YouTube channel and everyone kind of, you know, they agree, but there are some people that say, no, you know, stay at home, stay at home. My concern is when I've got people who are sitting in front of me right here, who have got the same outlook on life, why are we listening to a narrative that is injecting fear into our lives? Who wants to answer that? Go for it, Ed.
Well, I don't know if I can answer it, but I'll tell you what scares me. In terms of like, why are they doing this? I love a good conspiracy theory. And I have faith in the United States to come up with some conspiracies that you would never dream of. But the fact that this is the whole world just literally scares the crap out of me. I can buy into someone in the United States trying to pull the wool over our eyes. But the fact that it's the whole world scares me. And what scares me, like in the immediate future, it's not the trampling on our rights. I think it's going to take a little longer to bring out violence with that. What's going to happen is people are going to run out of food, whether it's the people who aren't working and can't afford to buy it, or whether the supply chains run down and the grocery store doesn't have food anymore. When that happens, it could get very, very ugly very, very quickly. I hope, the whole herd immunity thing, what they mentioned in the video, we can't sit like this for 2 years. It won't work. That can't happen. We will run out of food. And at that point, there will probably be a revolution.
Yeah. Sergio, I noticed you, Sergio, I noticed you agreed with what Ed was saying. But Dan, I just want to comment on something that you wrote. I said something like, why are we all listening? And you've written here, who says we're all listening on the whole? The majority are listening. Here, I don't know what it's like in New Zealand, but here in Australia, we now have to download an app. And if 40% of Australians don't download this app, it's like, okay, we're going to keep the restrictions going for a hell of a lot longer. I mean, how many have downloaded? I think to date, 2 million people. So we've got 10% of our population, just under 10% of our population have downloaded it. They need 40%. We've got 10 minutes to go, people. So we're asking people to download this app so that the governments can take control of us, so that we know where you are, so we can be able to isolate certain areas. But Sergio, what do you think? We are listening or we are fighting back? It sounds like from what you are, Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, you're allowed out. Sundays, you're not allowed out. So what's happening with you? Have your freedoms been taken away? Do you think this is a good thing, herd immunity?
Here in Panama, there is a trend of getting near the curve. I agree with herd immunity to a certain point, but the point is we're not kids. We are adults and we can follow rules. Just follow those rules and that's it. We shouldn't lose our rights in that way. But
we can't follow the rules. No one's following the rules.
Some people are not. That's what happened in Panama. At the beginning, it was quite flexible. They were like, okay, only certain people go to work. People who can work from home, work from home. Keep your distance. You can go out, but keep it flexible. Took it as a vacation, and they had to become a little strict. But now the problem is that the Panamanian government didn't really calculate this at how long it would take. And there are people who have gotten their jobs, contracts suspended, they've been fired. They are waiting for the government to give them food. Some of them are not receiving food. And people are starting to go out in the streets and doing riots. Here's the point. Like I was mentioning, they even cancel, you can't drink, you can't buy alcohol. That was forbidden here in Panama.
Lynn, what are you going to do?
This is week 7 for me. And I think I kind of go with herd immunity because my daughter back in 2008, she had the swine flu. We didn't have a vaccine. I took care of her. I didn't get sick. I was careful. I made sure that, things were disinfected. I washed my hands, whatever. Us all staying inside is just not going to solve the problem. It isn't. There has to be a point where they're going to have to let everybody out. And I'm hoping that that's sooner than later. Our office will probably rotate people in and out so that they don't have so many people in the building. Honestly, I'm beginning to get tired of this whole thing. And I think that we're adults and we should be able to do what we want.
Okay, I want to put this to you. So all of a sudden now, G-Mann, he's going to be elected as the new Prime Minister and President of your country. And so what G-Mann's going to do now is says, look, I'm so glad that you all voted me in. Our first order of business is to just open up the country, head out to Bondi Beach, go and walk the streets, go and do what you need to do. Life is back to normal. But then the outcome is 3 weeks later, in a country where I am, with 25 million people, 2 million people die. Well, let's just put that, there's a modeling for you. 2 million people die. Do you think 23 million people will go, 2 million people die? Or do you think the families of those people will then have me, or I'd be on a witch hunt for people to be able to attack me? So I'm just trying to come up with another scenario. So I would open up the country, and I know 2 million people is probably highly exaggerated, but let's just go 100,000 people die, where we've only had 80. We've only had 85 people. What do you think now? We've got 5 minutes left.
Well, as a politician, what's going to happen is if it's 100,000, you'll say if we hadn't done what we did before, it would have been 500,000. They're going to lie and claim that they made the best outcome no matter what.
Right. Sergio, you said the population of Panama is 4 million. So 4 million people. How many have died where you are?
People who've died, 167.
167. So again, what the guys were saying before, large amount of population, small amount of deaths.
And as we move through this data, what I want you to see is millions of cases small amount of death. Millions of cases, small amount of death. And you will see that in every state.
4.7 million people in New Zealand, 20 dead. 25 million people in Australia, 85 dead. Is it 65, 70 million people in the UK, and had something like, I don't know, 2,000 deaths. Again, when you have a look at the numbers don't stack up. So, Lynn, what do you think? Last comment. I think we've got about 4 minutes, but last comment. You think I should just open up the country, business as usual? And the comment is, hey, if people die, people die. Am I being heartless?
No, and they're already having conversations here in the U.S. that if they open things up and people get sick, who's responsible? Is it the owner of the store or is it the government? Who are you going to sue? That's what the discussion is. I had the news on when I went out today, and I think it's ridiculous. We're already trying to put blame someplace, but there's 325 million people in the U.S. and maybe 60,000 have died roughly, and it's a low number, which is normal for the flu. Why not just start to open things up? Even if you just allow 50% of the business to be open and allow people 50% in and see what the modeling that is then. But to come up and say that there's 2 million people who are going to die, and that hasn't, I mean, they were saying in the United States, we're going to have like 1 million dead, 2 million dead, whatever. And the numbers they're not adding up. So I don't think that it's right to keep everybody in. Yes, open things up, maybe just allow 50% of the people in. If you have a restaurant with 300, let 150 in, a little social distancing.
Well, this would be the question I would pose to him. If I had Scott Morrison sitting next to me, I would pose this question at him. Why is it so important that we need to have this insatiable desire to keep people alive? My question to him would be, if it's that important to save lives, why aren't we doing anything about the suicide rate here, the depression rate, the domestic violence, the car accidents, the motorbike accidents, the violence that happens in the streets? If the objective is to save lives, why this one? Why pick this one when there are so many other things that we can pick, like people driving on the road and killing themselves or suiciding? Why aren't we focusing on that? And why this? So that's the only question I would ask. With 1:55 to go, why do you think your government has used the narrative about this is so important to save lives? Who's got an answer for that one? Oh, look, none of you got an answer. No one's throwing their hands up.
No people to do jobs, no money generated.
Is that if we don't have people out there creating a business to be able to feed us, to be able to serve us, and people are going into deep depression. People are critically ill. Children are being abused. Deep depression is happening. That is the result. Yeah. This is the second wave of what happens when a restriction is put upon our freedoms. We've got less than a minute to go. Anyone want to say a final word?
Most economies have shut down, and most economies work on paying for a service so that it starts working. Most people don't have money. How is a global economy gonna get that momentum back?
This video go viral. I'm sure I'm gonna get some hate messages after this. Frankly, I don't care because this could save someone's life. I'm a nurse practitioner. I am licensed and certified. I am not on the front lines. I have a friend in New York City who's on the front lines. And for her safety, she cannot come out and say these things. So I am her voice. I'm not going to name names of people or hospitals for the safety of those involved. But this is her account, okay? I am her voice here. I'm going to tell you what she has told me. She wants this to get out. Now, I'm sure this is not the case everywhere. I'm confident. I have friends that are in other places. They're on the front lines. They're in ICU. And it's not like this everywhere. But in New York City right now, in some of the hospitals, this is what is going on. People are sick, but they don't have to stay sick. They are killing them. They are not helping them. She used the word murder, coming from a nurse who went to New York City expecting to help. Patients are left to rot and die. Her words. She has never seen so much neglect. No one cares. They are cold and they don't care anymore. It's the blind leading the blind. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was on with some nurse friends of mine, and we were discussing different medications that could be used to potentially help people. Doctors who were reporting around the country that they were using a combination of medications. that were helping people. People were not dying when they were on these medications. They were getting better. Those medications are not being used in hospitals in New York City. What is happening is that they're putting people on nasal cannula. If they require more than 6 liters of nasal cannula, they get intubated, they go on the vent, or they get trached if there's not enough vents. They don't get high flow, no non-rebreather, no non-invasive ventilation, no CPAP, no BiPAP. They're on a closed system, the ventilator, versus a CPAP or a BiPAP for fear that it will spread the virus. Which, by the way, I know a nurse in Florida who was fired for exposing that about CPAP and BiPAP and patients being put on the ventilator, like straight away to the ventilator, to be on a closed system. The patients don't know any better. They don't have family with them. There is no one there with them to advocate for them. So they are scared and they give consent. The ventilators have high PEEP, high pressure, which then causes barotrauma. It causes trauma to the lungs. Dr. Siddell, Cameron Kyle Siddell, a few weeks ago put out a video. He's in New York City, and he put out a video saying something is not right, like we're not treating this correctly. We're doing something wrong. This doesn't make sense. They pulled his video from YouTube and they took him out of ICU because they couldn't have one doctor going against the grain, going against their protocol. The protocol is propofol or some kind of sedation because they're on the ventilator, and IV antibiotics. There's no hydroxychloroquine. They're not using that combination with Zithromax. They're not using zinc, vitamin C, high doses of vitamins A and D. They laugh. This is what she's told me. They laugh at that. She says this is a nightmare. It's out of a horror movie, and I don't want to be a part of this. There are people who are a full code, and yet if they crash, they're not doing compressions because it will spread the virus. Full code, not doing compressions. Family is not there. They have no one to answer to. No one is being held accountable. A code was called and no one came. So sometimes they're not even resuscitating people. Again, left to rot and die. They're not given blood because we know that the blood is not oxygenated in these COVID patients. We know that. There are doctors all around the world sounding the alarms. These are the drugs that work. This is the pathophysiology of the disease. This is what's happening. And for some reason, it's not changing. Even though we know, some of us know what's going on, nothing is changing on the front lines. They stay in the same PPE all shift, except for the top pair of gloves. So 2 pairs of gloves, or I don't know, maybe more than 2, but they're only changing the gloves on the outside. Gown, mask, whatever else stays the same because all patients are COVID patients. So if it's a COVID floor, it's all COVID, but it's not because some of them are rule out COVID. So even if they're rule out COVID and they're not COVID, they're going to get COVID because they're using the same PPE all shift and they're carrying that contamination to all of the patients. They're not changing their PPE. They're not going into rooms. So they're running long tubing into the room so that they can manage the tubing from outside of the rooms. So if they're not going into the rooms, that means they're not assessing the patients as frequently as you would be otherwise assessing your patients. They are not doing rapid result tests. You're lucky if you get results in 5 days. Okay, this is coming from my friend who is in New York City right now on assignment, who went there to help, and this is what she's finding. It's a horror movie, she says. Not because of the disease, but because of the way it's being handled. She said we need help, and people are sitting there waiting in the hotels. Money, I guess, it's being paid for by FEMA, and yet they're still understaffed. And there are hundreds of people, hundreds of nurses in the hotels waiting to be called onto a shift. So there is manpower enough if the goal were to actually save people. But resources are not being utilized properly or to full capacity in a way that maximizes the patient benefit or improves the outcomes. The records and charting are crap. And now some of these hospitals in New York City are probably crappy on a good day. So you add in the fear of COVID and the fear of the whole pandemic and forget it. So if you're in a crappy hospital with crappy nurses, let's face it, all of us nurses have worked with crappy nurses before who don't care. So now you add in this, forget it. And they're having people do things that they can't do. So maybe things that they're not proficient in. So maybe a nurse who's not familiar or comfortable with using a ventilator. And it's that figure it out mentality. Figure it out. These patients are critical and they're crashing, figure it out. So nurses are being celebrated as heroes, right? We see how like the fire trucks and the police are like lining up and practically having these parades and celebrating them as heroes. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure in some parts of the country and other ICUs, I have friends that are working on the front lines in ICU and they are good nurses. And some of them are heroes. But we have nurses being celebrated as heroes who are killing people. They're not heroes. And they're being brainwashed to think they're doing something great just by going to work because they're brave enough to go to work. Well, what are you doing at work? You're certainly not saving people if you're not even running codes. You're not even going into patient rooms. You're a coward. You're hurting people. You're killing them. You're contributing to the problem. I know I'm going to get hate mail for this, and that's fine, because people are dying who don't have to die. Again, there's no family there, so no one's being held accountable. And once these people get intubated, they're being scared into giving consent to be intubated, and then for a lot of them, it's over. And there's nobody going to be held accountable. And there's nobody looking out for them. They are completely by themselves. There's like a total lack of critical thinking. It's out the window. And people are scared to speak up. And one person alone isn't going to change the overall culture of a hospital or a system or a city. Like I said, Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel's video was pulled from YouTube. And he was pulled from the ICU for sounding the alarm and going against the grain. So people are sounding the alarm. It's just not changing anything, apparently. So what can you do? Buck the system. I'm really fortunate I don't have any family in New York City that I personally have to worry about. If there are people that you are worried about, or maybe it's not even New York City, maybe you're in another city that's being really hard hit and you're just hearing really bad things coming out of that city, buck the system. Something is wrong in the system. So go against the grain. Request records immediately. Records, transcripts, immediately. If there's a medication that you want your loved one to be given, report it as an at-home medication and demand that it be continued. That's just a tip from inside the system. If you want a medication to be given, you've got to report that it's an at-home medication and that you demand that it be continued. Your loved one is not going to have you in there advocating for them once they go in. You're not allowed in. The only reports that we're able to get of what's going on are coming from the inside, and people are afraid to speak out. People have lost their jobs. Do not give consent for intubation if you don't want to be intubated or your loved one to be intubated. Demand non-invasive or less invasive ventilation methods. As soon as you give that consent, you might not come out of it. Now, in some cases, it might be appropriate. We just don't know. We know that it's being used inappropriately in a lot of cases, and that the ventilators are making people worse. Please share this video, make it go viral. People need to know this. This is the truth of what's going on from my nurse friend who's in New York City right now on assignment. This is murder, she says. People are being murdered and no one cares.